My name is Julia Cato. Thank you so much for joining me in today's workshop on writing objectives. We're going to go ahead and jump right in and first look at what are the different components of what we'll be covering today in our professional development seminar. So the first thing is our lesson plan considerations. We're going to answer that question, what specifically should you keep in mind as you begin your lesson plan? After that, we're going to look at the objective framework, or why is it critical to frame lesson plans around objectives rather than activities? And finally, we're going to look at how to evaluate the effectiveness of our objectives. We're going to answer the question, how can you tell that your objective is effective or not effective? So first, we're going to jump right in to those lesson plan considerations. And I have 5 considerations I want you to make in this order. So let's go through them on a high overview, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into them. The first one is those state standards. We're always going to start with the standards that are provided by the Arizona Department of Education or whatever state you happen to be teaching in. The next consideration is our lesson or our unit objectives. That's why we're here today. We're learning how to write those objectives and evaluate if they're effective or not. Next, we're going to come up with those activities. This is what we love to do as teachers. We love to come up with fun ways in order to be able to ensure that our students are meeting the objectives. Fourth, we're going to come up with an assessment. How do we measure whether or not our students have reached that objective? And finally, we're going to talk about accommodations. How can I ensure that all of my students, regardless of disabilities or special needs, how are they going to be able to access my lesson for the day? So let's go ahead and dive a little bit further into each one of those examples. So let's talk about state standards. So what state standard will I cover in my lesson? You want to be using something specific for both your grade level and the subject you're teaching. You're going to find those from your State Department of Education website. In this case, we'd be looking at the Arizona Department of Education, and we're going to find that standard that we're working from. Because if we're not working from a standard, we're really missing the overall picture of what our students need to be learning. The state standards kind of set out that year-long goal for what our students need to achieve as they're in our classes. But we can't learn every standard in one lesson. So that's where we start to break it down. We're going to look at the lesson objective. So we're asking the question, what objective will move my students towards the standard? So even though you might only choose one standard for a lesson, you might not be able to complete that entire standard within that one lesson, or even within that one week, or within that one topic. We need to be able to break it down into manageable chunks so that our students can really achieve something tangible and measurable. Next is our favorite part, is coming up with activities. What activities will help my students to achieve my objective? And as teachers, we love coming up with creative things to be able to help our students learn. We want to be having fun, and we want it to be effective and give them lots of practical tools in learning. And so we're going to ask what activities can really help us to learn in a hands-on environment. Then we're going to ask, what assessment can I use to measure my students' progress on the objective? So has my student mastered the objective? Are they done and can we move on? Have they made progress on the objective? Or do I need to continue working on this? Have they not, maybe grasped the concept yet at all? Maybe I need to try something new for the next lesson. This is really important because we want to teach based on our students. So this assessment could look like anything from a test, a written assignment. It could be an exit ticket. It could be observations that we as teachers make to see, but it has to be measurable. It's not just my student understands. It has to be my student was able to write. They were able to distinguish. They were able to say, right? So it's something measurable that our students are able to do that we as teachers are able to see. Okay, my student has clearly mastered this objective. And last, while we're designing lesson plans, we always want to keep in mind accommodations. So as soon as we have kind of developed our lesson plan, we want to look back through. what students do I have and what accommodations do they need? Do I have students with learning disabilities? Do I have students with 504 plans or IEPs that I need to make extra consideration for? This could be any number of accommodations from, providing an FM system for a student hard of hearing or providing different questions for a student who has dyslexia, maybe putting something into someone's reading range. So there's a ton of different accommodations that we can make, but our goal as teachers is to make sure that all of my students can access this lesson and not just some of my students. Next, we're going to talk about the objective framework. Why is it critical to frame lesson plans around objectives rather than activities? And I think this is such a tendency for so many teachers because, like I've said before, many teachers are so gifted with creativity and ideas, and they love to create things. They love to find things that other teachers have implemented, and we excitedly base our entire lesson around an activity that we want to do with our students because it's fun. And while activities are great, we have to base our lesson plans around our objective rather than our activities. And really the reason that we need to do that is it provides a lesson purpose. So if I want to complete an activity with my friend or with my students, my goal and my purpose in that might be my student engagement. It might be lesson enjoyment, which are good things that we want to establish by using activities, but that can't be the purpose. Because one of the most effective strategies for student achievement is using the objective and basing our lesson plans around the objective rather than the activity. This gives us a purpose, it gives us a direction, and it leads us back to the standards, which is what we want our students to learn. It's like Stephen Covey says in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, begin with the end in mind. Whether you want to be healthy, maybe your goal is to lose weight, or maybe your goal is to build muscle. Either way, you need to look at what is the outcome? What do I want what does it mean to be healthy to me? And if you create that outcome or that end, you can then design activities that will get you there. If you wanted to lose weight, you might implement cardio or a diet change into your lifestyle. But if you want to gain muscle, you might do a lot of weightlifting or eat extra protein. So those activities are going to change based on what your outcome you want is. It's the same with lesson planning. If we begin with the goal that we want our students to achieve, we can then go backwards and we can create activities that will get us there. Finally, we're going to talk about how we evaluate the effectiveness of our objectives. So there's really 2 ways we're going to talk about this today. The first is with the phrase, at the end of this lesson. So if you add the phrase, at the end of this lesson to your objectives, does your objective still make sense? Let me give you an example of an effective way that an objective would still make sense with this phrase. So if we were to say, at the end of this lesson, students will be able to decode words with the R sound. So this still makes sense because students at the end of your lesson might be able to, and the goal is that they are able to read words with words that say the R sound, right? But think about another lesson. Maybe you were to say, at the end of this lesson, students will have finished their yearly workbook, right? That doesn't exactly make sense. It doesn't sit with us. While they might work on a page of their workbook for that day, or we might use it as an assessment for that day, that's not really what you want your students to achieve for that day. Another way to think about how we can evaluate the effectiveness of our objectives is to think of a classroom visitor. Maybe there's a parent, a principal, or a member of the Board of Education standing outside of your classroom. And as your students are walking down the hall, that person, that adult, asks your students, what did you learn today? Or what can you do now that you weren't able to do before? And their answer should ideally reflect exactly what your objective for them was for that day. They might answer, I can read words with the R sound, right? And that's exactly what we want our students to be able to do. We want them to grab a hold of our objectives, take initiative as it being their own goal, and have them to be successful and to be able to share with others what their learning is so that we can achieve that success for our students. Because ultimately, as teachers, that's our goal. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.